Hey folks, Steve here with another Nations and Arms video for you today. We're going to be playing through the rest of 1809 very likely in a bit more of an expedited fashion than we have in the last video, which took up just the spring of 1809. We're going to try to get through the rest of 1809. The next video should cover 1810 and so on and so forth until we get to the end of the Grand Campaign or some other nasty business occurs and we need to re-rack it again. The previous campaign started in 1805, leading to a grand campaign victory for France in 1806, or shortly thereafter having conquered Britain, which was highly unusual. So we're just going to keep it going here. In the last video in spring, the Spanish War of Liberation, the Peninsular War, is progressing. France is holding on and trying to kick guerrillas out of their way, face off against Wellington. I did make a mistake last video of referring to the leader of the French Army of Spain as, I think I said Jerome, but it's not Jerome, it's Joseph, and I should have known that. Maybe I said Joseph and then I said Jerome. It is Joseph Bonaparte. And in that last video, I should have titled the video something like, Wellington versus Bonaparte. But he's not really Wellington yet, I don't think. And the Bonaparte is Joseph, who defeated Wellington. So they're still facing off there. Continues to be kind of a dicey situation. We're not quite sure what else is going to happen. The Spanish did get reinforcements for the beginning of this turn. They have to go into ports, so I put a militia into Valencia. And then I put a infantry corps into La Coruña to reinforce Wellington. So you had to put them in a Spanish coalition-controlled ports, and so I have. So some Spanish reinforcements in the middle of the year. That is nice to have. Certainly want to make use of that as the French are stretched pretty thinly. It's going to be up to Massena to kind of play pivot point. This force against Wellington. This force looking to siege and build a pathway to the south. These guys kind of holding the right flank. Massena picking one or the other to try to get the coalition off balance. I don't expect there to be a true conclusion to the Peninsular War this year. It'll be the French will be needing reinforcements in 1810 to really shift this theater, and then. In Germany, basically the Austrians are going to be on their way out here, will be conquered probably this turn, depending on how the maneuvers go. They have a demoralized, weakened army here. They have one, full morale army, but the army is not terribly big, and they've got some demoralized forces, some minor detachments, while the French have Napoleon's Grand Armée, the Army of Germany. We have our own French Army of Italy kind of pushing the Austrians back. So it's going to be a pretty straightforward set of affairs. I did do, what do you call it? Sorry, my mind is just totally blanking. We did have diplomacy, and they all failed. So there was multiple attempts to influence the Ottomans. There were some attempts on some minors, and Britain spent some money. France spent a little money, and to no real avail there. So much for that. So we can pretty much just get started right away with pulling chits and playing through, and we'll see what happens. What I'm probably going to do is play through a couple chits at a time and then show the aftermath, just so these videos aren't super duper long. Especially because we're going to be going through all of summer here, and potentially autumn and winter in this video. So pulling the next chit to start off the turn, and we get Coalition Land 4. So this is good for the coalition. And this is probably the best time to get this chit. So this might give the coalition a bit of a reprieve. Now, the only stacks of the coalition that can actually do anything are, let's see, not Johann, not Ferdinand, not Kulawat, maybe this Tyrolean insurgent unit, and then when I look in Spain, Mr. Wellington can activate. So not a lot of options, and Wellington is actually down to his last step, So he might use this opportunity to retreat, to get that Spanish corps and then the Portuguese detachment to replenish his forces against Joseph. So we'll play through, and we'll come back and report some of the progress. Okay, here we are at the end of summer. Just to quickly describe, now there was some maneuvering around the pass in sort of Moravia, and it ended up the Austrians managed to maneuver around and get into Vienna after Vienna had already been sieged down and its fortress destroyed. So they made sort of a last stand. In hindsight, maybe I should have waited around a little bit longer and, like, I don't know. The position was forced because the French occupied Prague. Maybe they could have snuck around a little bit more, but they managed to just sneak by Napoleon and get into Vienna. But of course, the French armies converged, destroyed the Austrian army, and basically Austria is down for the count, which leaves the French-Italian army heading home to get replenished with reinforcements eventually, and basically be prepared to head west to Spain to help the French forces there. Napoleon's also thinking about doing the same. And in Spain itself, sort of a stalemate outside Valencia, and really not a lot of progress. We pulled back that one French corps because it doesn't have enough strength to actually garrison any more forts, so it's got to play, center protection. And basically, Joseph's army absorbed Messina. We'll probably eventually need to sack Joseph, but we'll wait until they lose a battle for that, I guess, to just get the reinforcements. So both sides are kind of getting worn out here as we head into fall. I think right now it's just a question of, well, really Spain's the only place that matters right now. Everything else is kind of done. I will say that the French did burst out and have managed to destroy a couple of British ships. So we're getting shades of the first campaign. These were not great British ships, which is making me think I need to recall the escorts as the British, but all their naval chits came out first before the French, so the French kind of had a free hand here. So you can kind of see the reduced strength. And then there's potentially going to be an issue where the British can't trace supply very well. Well, I guess they can trace to Gibraltar, so that's actually probably okay. If I count it up, I'm gonna have to actually see about that. Yeah, there might be some supply issues for Wellington, at least the British corps, but the others are fine. So yeah, it's going to be a tight thing. We're going to go into fall. I'm just going to play through that, or start playing through that next, and we'll see what happens. There will be probably one last diplomacy attempt by France to maybe get the Ottomans on their side. If they could, that might be a pretty great victory, because then France would be allied with a lot of the board, and have some additional things to spare. Maybe drop an Ottoman army over here or down here or something to help end the Spanish War. Not sure they'll want to do that, but we could maybe try something like it. So, all right. Let me get rolling for the autumn of 1809. Okay, let's talk quickly about the fall of 1809. The French have had another good string of naval battles where they have kind of locked up some British fleets, have pushed various British fleets back and around, cutting off supply to Spain. So it's kind of interesting. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I guess supplies technically, I have to double check, but basically it feels like I've managed to get really good French fleets out on the board. Well, I could kind of see why now. I have one in the force pool that should not exist. I need to swap him out. That may have had an effect, but maybe not. All right, I only just saw that failure of setting up the game properly. That's my bad. Generally, I should point out, so we did do the peace deal with Austria. They took the immediate peace. They have a peace until after the summer of 1811, and we did a indemnities and a mandatory alliance. So after the summer of 1811, Austria will join a mandatory alliance, and then in spring of this next year, Prussia will join the alliance, and we're basically moving forces west to go to Spain and try to just seal that up over the next couple of years. Davout came down and crushed the Tyrolean rebels, and basically a couple of failed attempts of the Spanish to push the French back here. They're basically just in a holding pattern until things get better. The turn did end early by drawing winter quarters sooner than originally thought, so we didn't necessarily see the guerrillas get to do a whole lot of major damage. Not really, anyway. Actually, I forgot to move them, but they could have only moved like to here, which threatens the French if it doesn't necessarily cut off supply. So that's my bad. Another thing I forgot. I'm kind of playing quickly here. But that's it for the autumn of 1809. We're going to go into the winter. Now, the thing to know about winter is that it could end with the winter quarters chit the first time you pull it. So there may not be a whole lot of activity. And I should also point out that movement in Spain does accrue a greater amount of modifiers for attrition, and we have seen the French attrit quite a bit here. So definitely need to put some concerted French effort into Spain. I think in 1810, I'm trying to think of like historically what went on in 1810, and I can't think of it. But keeping in mind that Prussia will be allied, and we'll probably keep them in the north to fend off any surprise Russian things that go on, because basically our mandatory peace now ends. So there would be this potential for Russia to be convinced by Britain to join, but it wouldn't be until Britain's got more money to try to convince them. A free attempt might switch them over. So we kind of have to hope that Russia doesn't join the coalition here in winter, during the winter turn, because the mandatory peace is over. Let's get rid of that. Yeah, until winter 1809. It is winter 1809. So that's something we kind of got to watch out for. Maybe me pulling away from Austria was a little too early, but worst comes to worst, the Prussians can maybe keep the Russians busy until we can figure something else out, or we get another production phase. And then, yeah, if the French can focus on Spain, Russia stays out, we could see the French actually win the Peninsular War, get Spain conquered, probably put a peace treaty and alliance into place on them, with Portugal conquered, and then from there, we can entertain the idea of going at Russia, and we wouldn't have Spain keeping us busy, where they'd be out of it effectively. Maybe the British would try to declare war on Spain, but Britain by itself just doesn't have enough power to do the job, especially now that its navies are starting to get beat back yet again. But I'm going to try to resolve some issues, maybe give the British a free ship back, because technically I have a decent French Navy that shouldn't be on the board, so that's my mistake. Anyway, we'll get into the winter turn next and see what happens. Okay, hey guys, I just want to show the winter of 1809 passed very quickly for the chits pulled. It was Coalition Land 2 and then Winter Quarters, which ended the turn, which I was not expecting, but the coalition actually didn't move anything because they wanted to move their guerrillas first before trying to make any real push in Spain. So they had not moved, and there's really nothing else on the board for the coalition to move or make use of right now, with Russia being neutral. So that's it for 1809. Off camera, I'm going to do the production for everybody for 1810. And here's the funny thing about this game. When you're playing it two-player, and this is an important part that hasn't been important until now, this deep in a grand campaign, this late in the years, with the factions being in the situations that they're in. When a great power is neutral, or a major power, I should say, so that's for the ones that are going to matter for this: Prussia, Austria, Russia, Spain, Ottomans. When they are unplayed in a two-player game, or I guess, depending on how many people you have playing in a multiplayer game, but for our purposes, in this two-player game where it's really Britain versus France, unplayed major powers, if they're in an alliance, you just play them as part of your alliance, right? Simple stuff like we've been doing. If those powers are neutral, then certain powers are controlled by France, like their decisions, what they build, what they do is by France. Austria, Prussia, and Russia is done by Britain. Spain and the Ottomans by France. So if Spain were neutral for some reason, France would decide what Spain does when it's neutral in terms of building stuff or moving stuff on a neutral impulse. But they can't make Spain declare war or anything, as far as I can tell. So what's important about this is that Prussia and Austria are currently neutral. They are in a mandatory peace until they join their mandatory alliances. Actually, that's not true. Prussia is in a mandatory alliance as of spring 1810. So France will actually control the production of France, I think. But then for Russia and Austria, Britain is going to decide what they build. And then here's the thing. This is what I was thinking about. I said, well, if they're neutral until 1811, that means that the British control the spring 1810 production and the spring 1811 production. And for the Prussians, again, I believe that should just go right into the French control the Prussian production. But what's important about that is that, Austria would normally still have plenty of money to build units, but the British can sandbag the Austrians here. So we know the Austrians are going to join the empire in 1811 as a mandatory alliance. But we can choose what to build for Austria as Britain, and it would be advantageous to not have them have an army at all until after 1811. And so this is kind of a very interesting way, by the way, of in a grand campaign, not the 1812 scenario, but when you're at 1812 for Napoleon invading Russia, at the time, Prussia had an army of like 20,000 that was included. Austria had an army of like 30,000 that was included in the invasion of Russia. And if you were playing the grand campaign, you might think, well, gosh, these guys join a mandatory alliance, they build up their whole armies, huge stacks, and they help invade Russia. That wouldn't necessarily be historical. But the fact that Britain can sandbag the production of Prussia and Austria potentially, while obviously boosting the production of Russia, expecting it to be invaded or that they'll get Russia on their side, I think matters a whole lot. Like, I think that's a factor, certainly. And so what it means is, like, Austria, by the time we get to 1812, may only have so much money, may only have been able to build, one decent army that would go maybe still bigger than the historical army. But you have to imagine for a second that, there's a little bit of maybe gaminess there, but these mechanics that are almost seem to be designed for effect, but they're not obvious, is Britain says, okay, fine, like, we're not going to build anything as Austria. They have to pay war indemnities anyway, so we're not going to pay. And by the way, we're going to have Austria loan Britain £6, or the maximum that they're allowed to lend to Britain. And they're going to do that, which makes Austria, kind of an empty shell. And even when they join the mandatory alliance, they're not going to have that much to show for it. they will eventually get, before 1812, one production, but that's different than if they were building for several spring phases a lot of stuff. Britain can basically say they build nothing, they save their money, but because Austria can't save money from year to year, uh, it's basically wasted money. Like, it's just wasting the Austrian cash. They're not building armies. They're going to lessen the ability for Napoleon to make use of uh, the armies after the mandatory alliance comes into play. Now, the thing that France has to watch out for is that even when a faction in a two-player game is in a mandatory alliance with you, there is a mechanism to influence them to betray you and join the coalition, which is Britain basically does a diplomatic action against France. They can pay to get the modifiers, and then there's a couple of special modifiers like, are the, has France suffered a major defeat in the previous season before the diplomatic attempt, and then for every year that the mandatory alliance has been in effect, we get a +1 to that die roll. So it's not inconceivable for Britain to use a lot of its money to cause Prussia and Austria to switch sides, which is historically what happened, but only after the disasters in Russia. So there is a mechanism where, like, how strong does the French player want the Prussians or the Austrians to be? They don't want them to be too strong. So there's this really interesting balance, and it's almost like bidding in my mind, like you might see bidding in certain games. So I'm going to talk about this whole thing because I'm sure this little explanation is going to be, it's buried in a video, and some folks may not actually see this, so I'll have to bring it up in the review because I think it's actually really interesting. So, like the alliance credit system helps make sure that the Treaty of Tilsit can happen, the way that the mandatory alliance die rolls can go to convert them and make them betray France, and the fact that Britain can sandbag the production of Prussia and Austria does kind of make it where, in the short term, the British are probably going to keep those powers weak, so they can't help France very much. But even France isn't probably going to want to build them up too heavily, because once they're betrayed, then they have to fight a big Prussian army, a big Austrian army. And so that is how you would still potentially get a historically close or accurate or in the same ballpark size of the Prussian and Austrian armies that invaded Russia. This is all in a two-player game, which to me is probably the most likely case to be historical, because when it's multiplayer, every player is going to do whatever they think is right at the time. But it's funny how, like, the rule book doesn't explain that it could or should work that way, but the actual carrots and sticks of the game situation and the system do kind of lead to more historical outcomes, which I think is super duper interesting. So anyway, so that's why when we do production here in a second, you will notice that Austria will not have done a whole lot, and even Prussia may be very selective in what gets built by France's command, so to speak. But yeah, let's go do that. Hey guys, sorry, fake out there. I realized that as we're transitioning to 1810, it's really better to move that into another video. So despite me preparing to do production for 1810 and moving into 1810, we're going to do that in another video. So thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Keep gaming. We'll see you in the next one.